All right. We are live with Kris, Sammie, and Steve.
And John.
And hey, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We are the Screening Room AV. We have a special presentation tonight. We're going to be talking to Sammie about his review of the NZ500/RS1200 JVC projector, which is JVC's new entry-level 4K native 4K laser projector using the DILA chips. LCOS DILA chips. And we should soon see chat questions coming in. We have like about 50 people that are signed up. And so you should be able to put out a message there, and we will try to get your questions as we go. So anyway, we'll just kind of move on. We have, like I said, over 50 people signed up, so we want to keep this kind of moving. So this will be about, like I said, the whole 2024 lineup. We'll start out by talking about the new entry-level piece, which you can see up the top there. That's the NZ500/700, also known as the RS1200, and it's the same chassis as the 2200. And a little bit about us. We are the Screening Room, and I just updated this as of this morning. We're kind of proud of this fact. We have 175 five-star Google reviews. They are legit. They aren't friends and family paid off to send us reviews. What we're famous for is doing informative chats like these with people who actually know what they're talking about, like Kris and Sammie. We also are very famous for doing our side-by-side comparisons. We did an 8-projector shootout a couple of years ago. We did blind speaker shoutouts over the last couple of years where we compare everything on a level playing field. We try to take all the marketing BS out of everything and see how products actually perform. And we really appreciate that Sammie and Kris have participated with quite a few of those events. And because we're really lucky that Sammie is here in Colorado Springs and that Kris comes out here 2 or 3 times a year. And so we're able to get some real expertise when we do these events. And again, this is a shot here of our 8-projector shootout. That's Kris spent almost the better part of a week in there calibrating all those projectors. So we had a comparison side by side. It was incredibly hot in there. And then down below, you see our acoustically transparent screen where we hide speakers behind. And we do these blind speaker comparisons where we level match the speakers, hide them so people can't see what they're listening to. And those kind of things you can find on our blog and our events page on the screeningroomav.com. So our unofficial tagline is scientifically justified high end. There's a lot of snake oil out there, and often talk about how, as a result of that projector shootout, for example, we saw a $7,000 projector outperform one, 4 times the price in almost every single parameter except for brightness. So that's the kind of information we like to share. It's not always about just trying to max out the invoice or the ticket. It's about getting the right product for the right application based upon our subjective and objective testing. And that's a lot what we'll be talking about today, because Sammie just got done doing a lot of testing on that NZ500/RS1200. That's weird. I know JVC has that odd model number thing where they have 2 different versions. They're the same projector, the RS1200 and the NZ500. And Sammie and JVC were kind enough to let Steve and I and Dave, we had 3 of us from the company here. We spent an entire afternoon with Sammie comparing that with the RS4200/NZ900, the flagship piece, and that was very fun. So that was 3 or 4 or 5 hours, I think we spent just comparing those side by side. Yeah. So here's a little background on our presenters. Sammie Prescott is with us, professional ISF level 3 calibrator. He's a reviewer at Projector Central. He was also there at that 8-projector setup, and he was there helping out. Over 15 years of experience in video calibration. He does consults for various brands in the industry to improve their products. And he does calibration work that ranges from the everyday to doing work for colorists, showrooms, and demo rooms for CEDIA and like events like that. Sammie, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that's pretty accurate. That's pretty accurate.
We aim for accuracy. So, and then I'll just, I still have Bill Hunt's information over there. I got to clean up this slide. And then, of course, Kris Deering's been with us numerous times. And, Kris has become a good friend, as has Sammie, professional AV calibration, consulting and education, over 2 decades of high-level home theater experience, consultant for some of the biggest names in the AV industry. That's true. On-site and remote and pre-arrival projector calibration services, which we might touch on here in a little bit. Former technical editor of and writer Secrets of Home Theater and High Fidelity, Home Theater Magazine, and Sound and Vision. And he spent 24 years working for and with the U.S. Navy. I think it's 25 years, since it's been a year since I updated this slide, with the U.S. Navy. Oh, well, of course, it's been a while since you've been with the Navy, including acoustic engineer for the Navy's Submarine Acoustic Health Program. So, Kris, did you want to add anything to that?
I need to calibrate that deep dive AV thing. It's all blue. It should be white. But no, looks like it, guys.
Send me an updated slide. All right. So, anything else you want to say besides criticizing my slide?
No. Thanks, guys, for having me. Should be fun. I'm looking forward to hearing Sammie's talk on the new JVC. Haven't seen it yet, and answering any questions I can to help out anybody that's in the chat or whatever.
Yeah, and just we're going to be talking about too. Kris and Sammie have spent quite a bit of time in the field calibrating these new projectors, so they have some real hands-on experience about the existing lineup and the previous lineup certainly too. And we can talk about maybe versus some of the other projectors that are out there, Sony, so on, some of the DLP models and so on. So we're moving on. We're going to, again, overview of the projectors. Then we'll turn it over to Sammie to let him talk about his review. Then we're going to take a quick station identification break. We'll tell you a little bit about what else we have coming up. And then we're going to talk about the side-by-side that Steve, Dave, and Sammie and I did, comparing the older RS4100 as NZ9 versus the 4200/NZ900. That was kind of eye-opening. And like I said, Sammie and Kris's field experience. And then we'll talk about the value of adding external video processors versus tone mapping. And then Q&A we'll try to push most of the Q&A to the end, but we will be taking questions as if they are pertinent to the current discussion as we go. So with that said, here are the lineup, and I'm sorry if there's a lag between frames here. They're changing quickly on my screen, but it might be a little lag for you guys watching at home. On the left are the NZ series model numbers, and on the right are the RS series. The screening room happens to be an RS dealer, but the projectors are identical. It is a source of confusion, we know, but we're happy to take questions on that. But pretty much straight across, the NZ900 is the same as the 4200, the 800 is the same as the 3200, and so on. And then just setting up for Sammie to take over here. Here's a comparison of the new 1200/2200 compared to the previous generation. You can see it's considerably smaller. It's also lighter. Sammie will probably be talking about some of the differences that he experienced in terms of the heft and the overall fit and finish. And they redesigned the air intake and exhaust. So the new ones exhaust out the back rather than out the front. That's designed to increase installation flexibility. So with that said, I'll kind of leave it here. And then Sammie, at such point as you want to start sharing your screen, just let me know and I'll stop mine. But if,
Okay.
why don't I go ahead and stop mine for now anyhow, so we can take center stage. And there we go.
All right. So, well, one, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So when I had the NZ500, I had it for a decent amount of time. Not as long as I would like. I always like to have them for as long as possible, so I could test or like just check various things that I might have overlooked or forgotten. But I tried to be as thorough as possible with the unit while I had it. So obviously the biggest change is the chassis. It is significantly lighter. Not that you can't pick up a 900 or 800 by itself and move it around. You probably wouldn't necessarily want to mount it by yourself. With this one, it's easy. Like you can pick this thing up and swing it around, mount it by yourself. It's not an issue at all. It in terms of the feel of it, it size wise, it kind of reminds me of like a 640, like a JVC 640, but it doesn't have that like a gloss finish or anything like that. It's very matte. So if you're familiar with like say the 900, how you normally have the strip down the center that is like looks like a brushed metal, and then you have the normal fill on the side, the entire chassis is like that. They removed all of the actual buttons on it outside of the power button. So there is no more actual physical controls on the unit itself. Not awful, but a lot of times when you're doing an install, or especially even myself when I'm testing, depending on what I'm doing, I don't even use the remote. I would use the actual physical buttons on the unit. Most people aren't going to miss those because you don't really need it, but the remote's the same. Outside of that, the unit itself looks nice. Like it still feels premium, but it does feel like somewhat of a step down. Like it makes the 800 and the 900 feel even more premium now. But again, this doesn't feel like it's cheap or poorly made. Like it feels like a really good unit. The lens, it's definitely a larger lens. I want to say this one's 80 millimeter, and it's actually pretty sharp. It's sharper than I was expecting. When it comes to just like the panels themselves, like in focusing, the focus is good, it's tight. It's not particularly what I would say fast. It's roughly about the same speed in terms of shift and focus as a 900 or 800. I wish it was a little bit faster, and it still has that slight kind of lag or delay. So like if you're going in one direction, you need to back up. When you back up, you hear it turn effectively, like if you want to have it go in reverse, and then it really starts to move. So none of that really improved, but the lens itself is sharp. It has good brightness uniformity. The black uniformity is good. This one had maybe a hint of a bright corner if it was on tabletop, upper right corner. Outside of that, it was very minimal. Like you had to let the black floor sit and let your eyes adjust to see it. But it did have a single bright corner. Is able to get pixel focus on like the panels. If you deconverge them and focus them, you can get pixel level focus, pixel definition. So that's really good. Convergence, it needed a little bit on red. I couldn't do a whole panel alignment because that would shift it over too much on the far left. But if you do zone, you only had to really work on the lower right hand side and then the far left, and that was it. So the lens was good, sharp, good uniformity in that regard. It's very quiet. They did change the fan curves as well. So they changed the fan curves in the 800 and 900, and they changed them again in this. So now the fan curves are basically say 46 is kind of like the normal audible noise. Once you go to 47, you can go to 47 up to 74, and it will keep the same audible noise for the fan. So you can run it brighter with not much difference in noise. And actually, when we were at your house looking at it, running it at 74 was still quieter than you running it at. It was about the same as you running it at like 66.
Right.
But if you had went up to the next fan curve on your 900 would have been louder. So
on what's the lumen
good
output
noise.
on the 500?
It's spec'd at 2,000 lumens.
What was the
and you will
MP5
get
spec
what
at?
I measured was 19, I believe.
Okay.
I think it was 19.
Well, the nice thing about
Yeah, that
that
sounds
though
right.
is,
For the
I mean, it's the
MP5,
MP5
the
replacement. That
1100.
means it's brighter by design, but the MP5 only had low and high because of the bulb, which means that you're probably going to get a higher
Right.
usable light output at a quieter level than you would have got with the MP5 because of those fan profiles. So that's nice. Plus, obviously, it's going to fade a lot slower than an MP5 would have. MP5 has the advantage of obviously you can swap it and get back to square one, but that's nice.
Right. So
And
yeah, the
and less heat
MP5
too.
was 19. Yeah, but much less heat. There are some benefits though to the NP5 that you do not get with the
Yep.
NZ500. But when you kind of consider what those are, it's kind of a fair trade-off.
The NP5 is 1900. I double checked, so
Yeah.
that was the rating.
So I measured. Let me make sure. I have to check my notes. I want to say I measured like 1980 something. No, 1938 is what I measured, and
raw?
that's in high bright.
Okay.
Yeah. If you are in a actual like accurate picture mode, so like natural, cinema, vivid, you're gonna get around 1650 to 1730 usable lumens. Once you correct for that, it's gonna drop some. So if you start off in a brighter picture mode, so say like cinema or SDR1 or SDR2 without any correction, bring it down, you'll probably end up with around 1600-ish once it's accurate and corrected to D65. And that's for all the picture modes. So they still get their spec of whatever their lumens are off of high bright. But with this one, they actually hit the spec for contrast in normal picture modes. So actually, let me share
and
this.
while Sammie's pulling up some of that here, Steve and I got to see that, and I can vouch for what Sammie's saying. It seemed very, very sharp. The contrast looked excellent, especially when we had it at about the 116-inch screen size that I have for 16 by 9 in here. And the noise level was quite low. And here we go. Here's Sammie's actual measurements.
I did a bunch of contrast measurements. I did them reflective, and I also did them off the lens. At the base, and this is common for JVCs, it would be a surprise if I didn't find a JVC that measured roughly around 22,000 full laser aperture fully open. That's like their base. Like almost every JVC I've touched is going to measure that. Have I seen some that are lower? Yeah, but you're talking like maybe 21,000 to 1 aperture fully open, full laser power. So I measured 22,872 to 1.
Now, was that at the shortest throw, or is that at just a random throw?
That's the shortest throw.
Okay.
And then at the longest throw.
And this is like in a natural mode, not a high bright?
Correct. At the longest throw with the aperture fully closed, it was 39,812 to 1 out of a 40,000 spec. And this is a natural.
That's wild.
Once you start going into high bright, you're going to start seeing upwards to around 50, 51, 52, 53,000. And like with all JVCs, generally, just out the box, the black 4 was like 0.004.
Yeah,
and it
about
caps
0.04.
are it's like it's 0.004, and it flat lines at 0.002, like pretty much every JVC that you'll find.
Yeah.
But I am glad to see that contrast spec is based off of an accurate picture mode. So it's not done. It's not something that you need to do a high bright for 100% laser, -15 aperture, max throw. It's not like that. You do have to close on an aperture and hit max throw to get 40,000 to 1. But I mean, for the most part, it's going to be on par in performance with every other JVC at just starting at around 22,000. So,
and if I can just toss in a comment here, just looking at it, even just from the first impressions when you first powered it up, it looked like a JVC, right? I mean, we've come to expect what a JVC is going to look like, and this thing didn't look outrageously different than, even comparing to like the 900. They all have that incredible contrast in the darker and mid-level images, and like you said, that black floor was just really uncanny, even on an entry-level piece. And if you can just kind of put that into context in terms of other projectors, what other numbers do you usually see looking just anything outside of JVC at best?
Depends on the projector and the technology. And like if it's say like a Barco or a Christie, and if it has a UHC lens, that's going to vary. But say if you're looking at a Sony, it's not uncommon to see something that's like 16,000 to 1, or 20,000 to 1, depending on what you're looking at. In Epson, again, like native, it's going to probably be around 8,000, 9,000 to 1 contrast. Well, no, that's not true. Native is going to be like around 4,500. You can get it up. Yeah. You can, depending on what you're doing and how you're running it, you might be able to see like 8,000. Once you start turning on like dynamic, you're going to see much higher than that. But if you're talking native, I've seen like 45.5. Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I don't think people realize is full on and off is great, but it's not hard to turn off the laser, because at that point it's supposed to be black. Like if it weren't, then there's a problem. I'm more concerned with how it handles things near black and coming out of black. Like, can it do that? Can I hit my ITP targets? That's what's more impressive to me. So this handles all of that fine. There's no real issues that I saw with it. But in terms of price to performance, let's say the big three, let's just stick to the big three for right now. So in terms of price to performance, I don't think there's anything that you're going to get this better that performs this well at this price. Now, if you need more lumens, obviously you're going to have to look at either something higher in the tier from JVC or just something else altogether. But if you're talking about like the $5,000, $6,000 range, and you don't really want to go above that, and you want to stay within Sony, JVC, Epson, like that area, I don't think there's really anything that you're going to get this better. It's definitely bright. Like we had it on your screen, and for as big as we zoomed the picture up, I had no problem with watching, like when we're looking at Beetlejuice, like I had no problem watching that on your screen. Like that was totally fine for that size. And if you have a smaller screen or a smaller throw, you're going to get even more benefit out of it.
And just for reference, so people know what we're talking about, I have a 11-foot wide, 144-inch diagonal perfed Studio Tech 130 as scope, and 16 by 9, it's 116-inch. So with the perforation, is about a 1.1 gain, and it was plenty bright to light that up without any issues, as you were saying. And we even pushed it all the way at one point to zoom in 11 foot wide all the way onto that screen. And obviously only using the center of chip, since we're using the zoom method. We weren't using an anamorphic lens or anything. We actually had to overshoot the top and bottom of the screen and push that all the way to 11 foot wide. And we can talk about that more later when we get into what we saw. But just kind of wanted to put that for context so people know what screen we're talking about.
Well,
Yeah,
sorry, can I
and
interject real quick?
like this is just a random throw. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I've seen it in forums and stuff. One thing that like I don't think is being talked about, but I think some perspective would be kind of nice here. If you look at the output, like that's why I asked earlier. So this is a 2000 lumen output, which is 100 lumens more than the
Hmm.
MP5, by spec, but I'll bet you it bores out. I bet you they're going to be pretty close to each other, calibrated or whatever. This one may be a touch higher or whatever. But it's going to be in that ballpark. So, but perspective on that is the laser projectors from JVC have really been the first models where there's differences in light output. So, when the last line came out, technically other than the 4500, their first lasers, you had the NZ7, NZ8, and NZ9. There were clear differences between those in terms of how much light they put out. Like the NZ7,
Kris,
was, yeah.
we just got a bunch of people in chat saying they can barely hear you. Can you move closer to the mic? Or
I can touch it up against my mouth, but I mean it's just a few inches away. I turned my gain up.
Well, just
You guys
before
might have to
comments
turn up your
come.
gains there. I don't know what to do for you. But
Yeah,
so
it's
the
all the way up on
NZs,
this end.
yeah. So the NZ series was the first series that you really saw true differences in light. Like if you looked at the old ads for like the lamp ones, they'd say this is brighter, but it really didn't bear out. If I measured an NX5, NX7, NX9, they were, other than the slight aperture differences because of the nine's bigger lens, they really were pretty close to each other in brightness, other than, one could have a color filter or things like that. But like just raw output, they were almost identical. They all used the same bulb. There really wasn't a lot of differences there. With the laser series, there's a lot of difference. But if you think about that, that means that this new NZ500 is as bright as an NX9 was. So back when people were using NX9s or even like the 640s or whatever, you now have a projector that's $6,000 that puts out as much light as those, maybe possibly slightly more, at a quieter level than you had before, with less heat, similar contrast performance, and things like that. So, it's real easy to compare it to the rest of the JVC line and be like, well, what do you get with this one? What do you get with this one? But if you just look at the base model compared to, the bulb models of the past, if you were getting by, if you're still somebody sitting on like an E-shift model, like a 540, a 640, a 520, whatever, now you have something that's at a pretty low price that's giving you similar light output, if that was enough before, but quieter, while still delivering, similar contrast levels to what you got from the NX series, the first 4K ones and stuff. It's not quite the native contrast that you got with the last generations of the E-shift chip, but I mean, God, by that time they were on like the 8th or 9th generation of that DLA chip. We're on like the 3rd generation of this one, I think it is. So in this case, it's only the 2nd generation chip. So I think that's kind of being lost. Like everybody kind of like
No, it's third,
shoehorns the
right?
500 as like, oh, it's it's just the little baby one. It doesn't put out that much light, but like compared to everything before it puts out quite a bit. So
Yeah.
Yeah, Kris,
Yeah,
what
Yeah,
you're
and
saying.
like
Yeah, Chris, what you're saying is you get the performance of the high end projector from 4 or 5 years ago for the entry level price now.
I mean, you're getting a chip that's similar. You're getting contrast specs that are similar. You're getting light output that's similar. Now, obviously, like the NX9 had the different lens. The big JVC lens versus the smaller lens. There's always this like, oh, this, oh, that. They have a slightly different aperture size. This is a bigger lens than the old 65 millimeter ones, but those also had some other features. Like clear motion drive, 3D. Some of those other things that people might like. The bigger lens versus the smaller lens, I've always kind of felt like the real advantage to the bigger lens is one, it'll be a little more optimal for a shorter throw because you have more glass to work with. So, as you get shorter and shorter of a throw, you're using more and more of the lens. So now you have more lens to do that. So the odds of having like chromatic aberration near the edges of the lens is going to be less than it would be on the smaller lens or you're not going to get as much distortion if you're using way more lens shift. But it's not like the standard JVC lenses have been bad by any stretch in the past. Obviously, some units might be slightly better than others or something, but I mean, that's the case with pretty much any projector line. But I just like I said, everybody kind of jumps up really quick, and that might be fine if you need certain features. But I think that what's being lost is that at like $6,000, this thing has a lot of the performance that you were getting from pretty much any of the top line of the lamp based ones, because you have similar light. It's going to go slower. It's going to drop slower. It's going to have, quieter, less heat, a lot of additives that if you don't need some of these, key 3D or whatever and stuff like that, you can get a really nice projector here for a really low price. So.
Well, yeah, you can get a really great projector. Like I said, in terms of performance, and it depends on what someone values more for performance. Like if they're going to try to light up a 150-inch screen, and they are going to have a pretty decent throw, you're going to have to look for something else. Like this may not be it for you. More often than not, and me and Kris have talked about this before, people don't necessarily correctly pair their projector with their screen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and more often than not, they will have a huge screen and a projector that's just not bright enough. And there's other features that, for instance, if someone wanted 4K 120, you're not getting that here.
Right.
This is limited to 8 gigs on 4 lanes, so you're only getting 32. It can only do up to 4K 60. If you want it 3D, you're not getting that here. You would have to step up to an NZ800. And there's not a lot of projectors that are even doing 3D anymore. So your choices are starting to become even more limited. So it depends on what someone needs, what they're probably going to get. But I would say for just, even if you're just starting out, or if you have an older model that's like one of the older E-shifts and you want, to step up to laser, this is kind of what you should be looking at. It actually is really good.
Yeah. And then just to kind of interject, the 700 goes to there's a difference. The 500 is the Gen 2 chips, and the 700 is supposed to have the Gen 3 chips. So it should have improved contrast and all the other things that come with the new generation of DILA chips. And also it's 300 lumens brighter, supposedly.
I haven't measured
the color filter, which I imagine.
I haven't really measured any difference, honestly, between the Gen 2 and the Gen 3 from a contrast perspective. I've measured enough Gen 3 chips now to know that they kind of fall about the same as they did before. I just don't think it's significant enough to say that, the Gen 3 is the one you want for contrast. I know they're saying the Gen 3 goes through like some kind of different QC step or something like that. Like they're claiming they're a little flatter or whatever, but Sammie and I, and even you guys have seen that even with some of the Gen 3, I've seen some black field uniformity issues, near corners and stuff. Now, I've seen some that don't really have it, and I've seen some that do. But I mean, I could say the same about the Gen 2 chip. So, the Gen 2, Gen 3 thing, it's like,
and that's of course from JVC. They're saying, that JVC is saying, because we did ask them for clarification on that they will be a different sorting process for which chips go in the 700 versus the 500.
They've probably been.
What does that mean real world? We'll have to see.
Yeah, they're probably bidding.
And
so,
with the chips,
the top percentage,
for instance, this probably won't come through well, but I was able to get like pixel definition on these. Like it was super sharp. So even with this being a Gen 2 chip, that doesn't mean it's going to be bad, right? Like this was super sharp, and it had, like I said, one bright corner, but it was something that your eyes had to really adjust to in the upper right. Outside of that, the black uniformity on it was really good.
Hey, Sammie, just so everybody understands, you deconverged the picture there is what we're looking at so that you could see the sharpness, right?
Yeah, yeah. I deconverge it so I can actually look at like the sharpness of each individual panel,
Yep.
um, and then kind of go from there.
And speaking of that, this is all recording at full bandwidth, the way our Riverside software works. So once we upload this after it's done, everybody would be at full resolution. So if there's any audio or video issues you're picking up now, we apologize for them. It's just internet. This is the internet, right? So once we publish this, all that should be cleared up.
Hey, Sammie, while we're talking about lenses, there's actually a couple questions. One person asked how the lens sharpness, how you think it compares to the MP5, the NZ7, and maybe the Sony XW5000.
1 second. I'm just letting my dog out.
Oh yeah, that's important.
Real life intrudes. One thing I want to say too is often this stuff, when we did that big 8 projector shootout some years back, I think maybe even Kris can speak to this too, is that Sony has an awful lot of edge enhancement software especially out of the box. And even when we dial it back, I guess you can't really turn that off altogether. So I think some of the differences in sharpness people talk about is often due to that.
The new generation of JVC, I would actually say, is a little more similar to Sony than their previous ones. So Sony by default typically has their reality creation on. If you look at the 5000 ES, the XW5000, their new one that would be at the same kind of price point as this one, they use a even more aggressive amount of reality creation out of the box to kind of make it look a little sharper. I think they use like the default at 40, where like in the standard ones they usually do 20. And then they have their digital focus optimizer, I believe, is on by default, which I'm not a big fan of that feature. The JVC defaults to a 5 on their enhance. And with the new generation, I saw this early on with the 800 or the 800 and the 900. I saw the 900 first. Their levels, like they have a standard high res 1, high res 2. It used to be really obvious differences between those with the last line, like high res 2 looks slightly soft, high res looked pretty good, and standard looks slightly sharpened. The new ones, standard and high res, honestly look almost identical to each other. So they are like a slightly sharpened amount. High res 2 kind of looks like it did before, where it's kind of slightly almost unsharpened. So you have to be really careful. Like the default of 5, honestly, it just looks a little over processed to me. You know, I would probably tell people, like, if you like a little bit of sharpening, maybe a 1 or a 2 with one of those at the most. Like, I don't think I would ever recommend going over a 2. But out of the box now, it looks a little more like what some of the Sonys look out of the box, because even those I usually typically turn down. And on the 5000, I definitely would have turned it down. And stuff like that. So, you know, every projector has its little quirks of like their out of the box things. And a lot of that just comes down to, like, at the end of the day, you know, they're like, well, if somebody took it out of the box, we want it to kind of look like this. Just like every flat panel looks a little different out of the box, you know, but if you calibrate it, they'll look more similar than dissimilar. And you would find probably the same thing with these. Like if you took a Sony 5000 and kind of optimized all of its settings, you know, for its base mode, and then took a JVC and optimized its base mode, you know, obviously Sammie has more experience with this 5000. I haven't really seen it, but I imagine the two would look very similar in a lot of respects. And then there'd be the differences that's when the differences kind of get more obvious, in my opinion.
So I'm sorry, what was the question again, Steve?
The user was just curious how the sharpness on the JVC compared to the what was it? The NZ. Now I can't remember the Sony XW5000 and the
MP5 and
MP5 and the NZ7. Yeah.
So this is definitely sharper than any of the 7s that I've seen. You also have to account for some sample to sample variance, just because there's always the sum of parts, right? So you have everything that goes into it, and everything that goes into it has its own set of tolerances. where it can be like, it can go from this far to this far, and anything within there is acceptable. So then you have the sum of parts where you're not going to get two things that are going to perform exactly the same. I've seen some MP5s that were like razor sharp. This would be equivalent to some of the ones that I've seen that have been like razor sharp. But the same thing goes for the Sonys. So like the XW5000, I've seen some where their lenses were extremely sharp, and I've also seen some where they weren't so sharp, and they've even had like some yellow splotching on it. Like, so it's kind of hard to say. And you also have to keep in mind that this is a sample of one.
Right.
So this could be like a unicorn for all I know.
Yeah. We're going to be
this
getting
was
the
really sharp.
2200 700 in here before long, and we'd love you to put your eyes on it, Sammie, when we get it. And by the way, they're supposed to be shipping mid-December, I think is last we heard on both these new models.
Yeah, and also to Kris's point in regards to the like the standard, what is it? Yeah, standard high-res 1, high-res 2. So that changed in this one. Now it is off, standard, and enhanced. It still does a lot of over-processing. There's no way that I would ever recommend anyone set this to 5 on any of them. It would either be turn it off, use Filmmaker, which was going to disengage it anyways, or set it to 1 or 2. I generally kind of stick around 2 for people that when I set it up, but 5 is, things start to look a little crunchy if you have it set at 5, and it's visible processing. So like if you, an equivalent for people that are maybe more familiar with Sony's, if you have reality creation on and digital focus optimizer on, well, one digital focus optimizer has its own set of issues, but if you have reality creation on and you turn it up to say, I don't know, 25, and you have digital focus optimizer on, you get this very distinct ringing around everything. Like you see it around people's faces, you see it in their hair, you see it on absolutely everything. 5 is not that bad, but it's not far from it. Like 5 is pretty intense. And that's on standard or on enhanced. So it really should be turned down to like 1 or 2, because it's just too much.
If I can just contextualize a little bit of this, what we're talking about is edge enhancement, artificial sharpening, and how it manifests itself. And I think all 4 of us here, all of us find that kind of objectionable. And there's this one torture shot from Greatest Showman I always pull up where Rebecca Ferguson's in the dress with a fine pattern on it, and you can really see that where it's almost like a shimmer, like it's crawling on when these edge enhancement things are turned up. It was interesting, even though when we turned the JVC all the way up, we didn't get that effect, but we definitely we started looking really phony. You used that word crunchy, Sammie. I think that's a really good word for it. That kind of just sums it up pretty well.
Yeah. So they did change that. So now it's off, standard, and enhanced. In terms of accuracy out of the box, it definitely needs calibration. Well, at least this one needed calibration. It is much closer now with D65, because with most JVCs, if you are trying to get close to D65 and you're not going to calibrate, you generally have to select 7500. With this one, I was actually able to select 6500 and get fairly close, but you'll see that it has like this like little hump that you kind of can't get rid of. Well, you can get rid of it, but not really. There is ways to get rid of it. But outside of this, when you start looking at like things like the color checker, right? This is a 1.5 average, a 4.4 max. That's not bad. Like someone doesn't have to feel that they need to get it calibrated because it's not like grossly incorrect. Can it be better? Absolutely. But this is not bad by any means. It's like a saturation sweep. Like all of this is good.
That's really good.
Gamut coverage for 2020 is 69% in UV, 64 in XY. For P3, and remember, this doesn't use a filter. This is 88% in XY and 94% in UV. That's better than you're going to get with the higher end models without the filter. So again, it's performs very, very well. HDR performs well also. It has a little bit more issues within the RGB balance and the grayscale. I had a very significant hump of blue, and then it almost kind of clips twice. So like at around 65% to around 85%, it will track the same luminance, and then there's a small uptick where it will start to change the luminance value, and then it will track a little bit higher, but it will remain consistent from 85 to 100%. It does roughly try to track PQ, but the real issue is more so you do kind of need to fix the grayscale because it's had a blue bias to it, which kind of goes into correcting it. So,
and we did have a question here. Somebody asked about how well Autocal works. Previous JVC laser projectors using Autocal had some trouble, fell apart with real content APL levels around 10%. So I don't know if you want to bring that into what you're talking about there.
Yeah. So with Autocal, Autocal's still available, and there's going to be a new version. I want to say it's going to be 1.01. That is going to add support for the 500 and the 700, but also support the other models as well. What was really added to that is the ability to effectively profile or create an offset from a reference meter. So a few things for anyone that knows how these work. You're using the internal test patterns. The internal test patterns are still going to be full screen, so not really representative of content. So you do have to keep that in mind. Basically what you do is you start Autocal, you go connect your spider. The offset only works with the spider X and spider
Probably
Elite,
X2.
or I'm not too familiar with all the spider. Yeah, I think, yeah, X2. You connect it, and you have basically two sections. The top section is your spider meter. You basically just hit read or measure, and it's going to measure the test patterns from within the JVC, and it's going to update the values. You then can measure or bring up the test pattern for, say, white, red, green, or blue. And then you would use your spectro. Ideally, you're doing this with the spectro, whether it be a Jetty, a PR, a Konica Minolta, CR, whatever. You need to have something that's going to report the actual values to you. So if you have a Jetty, you could just use the screen. If you have a CR, you could just use CRI app or whatever. And you're going to take a reading with that instrument. You're going to get your values. You take those values and you're going to insert them, and it's basically creating an offset for the spider. It does work. It actually does improve the base accuracy of the spider. However, that does not mean that you do not have the deficiencies of the spider. So if you cannot, it's not going to change its low light handling, for instance. It's still not going to read great near black. So you're going to be able to get a better calibration, but you also need to know how to use that meter in order to get the best out of it. So whether that is reading off the lens, getting the projector super close, zooming in, like however you decide to do it, you still have to employ those techniques in order to use it.
Yeah,
but it does actually work.
I feel like they really I'm always surprised at some of like the decisions were made. Like I like the idea that they have something that you can profile, but then they limited it where the only thing you can use now is a spider, where at least in the past you could use a spectro for the color portion with an i1 Pro 2, which was actually pretty good for color. It just was awful if you used as for gamma, just like it was awful to use a spider for the color,
Spider for color, right?
but it was okay, for gamma, as long as you had the light level. But I mean, the gamma calibration on a JVC Autocal is just a light meter. It's not doing anything except for reading light. So it's like they could have just kept it where you were using like a Spider 5, because then you're just pointing it back. You can put it as close as you want. You get the light level that you need, because again, you're just using it as a pure light meter. So, you didn't have to do all this stuff like point it at the screen and zoom this where it's non-linear. They could have left the i1 Pro 2, and then honestly, you'd probably get a better result if they had support for a Spider 5 with an i1 Pro 2 for a color meter, and then just have an option in there for the new line that says, do you want to use 100% or 10% windows? JVC has window patterns built into its test pattern suite, so they should be able to do that. I mean, even if they didn't have it built in, I mean, I can't imagine that'd be hard to add in. They're just probably like a JPEG or whatever they're using, that's generated in there. They have a ton of test patterns in their service menu, but most of them you can't really use them for anything, because when you're in the service menu, you can't access any other menu. But
yeah,
but like, it's things like this that I'm always kind of like wonder and kind of shake my head, going like, like I know they have the best of intentions and stuff, but I'm like, who asked for this? And then they thought that this was the implementation that would work. There's other things they could have done that probably would have required less work, in that software, that would have given better results at the end.
So, I mean, I'm glad they have it. Because contrary to what a lot of people might think,
patterns, it doesn't matter if you've profiled, because you're still not going to get a good
that's
result.
True.
That's what I mean. It's like you fix something that it would be great if the pattern worked, but the pattern doesn't work, so it doesn't matter if it's profiled or not. It's still going to be bad. So I don't know. It's just me. Like, it's always frustrating.
I mean, I'm glad they have it, because
let's not forget we got two of the best calibrators. I mean, seriously, no exaggeration, two of the best calibrators in the world here talking. So just speaking for us, we often just kind of say, hey, we can have Kris pre-calibrate. We have Sammie here locally who can calibrate. So those are always a much better option. But anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Sammie would probably say the same thing as me. At the end of the day, Sammie and I are pro calibrators. We make part of our living doing calibrations. But I'll be the first to admit it. If like JVC came out with an Autocal program that used a 10% window, and then even if it was just an i1 Pro 2 and like, a DLL for an i1, meter, or even the old Spider 5, and you set it up right, honestly, like end users could use that and get a calibration that would be probably more than enough for 95% of users out there, unless you just had to have like the most accurate projector out there. But instead, they're, you know what I mean?
Right.
They're ignoring the issues they have and then adding features that's like, okay, well, that's great, but it still doesn't fix the underlying issue. And I'm saying this is like, if JVC did this, I could lose money on it, but I still, at the end of the day, want the tools to work the way that they should work, so that people that don't have access to a calibrator or don't want to take that on their own would have the tools to be able to do it and do it actually right.
Right.
Yeah. I think having it is good. Having it is good because I look at it this way. If it spurs interest for someone possibly getting into calibration, that's great. Like for myself, I don't do calibration full time. Like that is not my livelihood. That's not my main job. So if I lose JVC calibrations at the end of the day, it's fine, whatever. Like I'm not really, that's not a concern. If it spurs other people to get into it, that's great. But at the same time, I prefer if they had have made it so that I can actually use reference meters just directly to the software and choose the window. But what I do when I generally get these, I test them for effectively everything. So all the people that are super into it, that know how this works, all this cool stuff that you can do, you can still do. So none of that's changed.
Right.
So like this is
Yeah.
a 1D with a
Yeah.
10% window.
Using their
This is the
tools.
gamma for it. So
Yeah,
you could, you could do all the cool stuff still if you know how to do it. So don't worry about that.
Yeah.
You're not, the Autocal software is good software and it's free. There's no reason someone shouldn't at least maybe explore it. If
So at
they're
least they have
interested.
like a primer, what involved in calibration. So in the
Right.
interest of, I would make sure we finish up before, because I know there's also interest about how we thought it compared to the 900 when we compared it side by side with other stuffs here. So what else did you want to show about the 500 before we move on to the next thing? And then there were a couple of questions that relate to the 500. There's two of them about just motion, just in general. I mean, when we had it here, we didn't look at any sports. I don't know if you did, Sammie.
No,
We're
I
always
didn't look
obsessed
at
with
any sports.
movies here and that kind of content. I don't know about Sammie, but I don't think me, Kris, or Steve are just huge sports fans. So I'm sorry that we didn't dig into that.
I didn't watch any sports, unfortunately. I'm sorry. I pretty much only watched films. Motion was fine. Nothing stuck out as being wrong. That's probably more so in the issue of the CMD only working for 60 hertz. So you can use CMD with 60 hertz. Actually, I did look at some 60 hertz motion like test patterns, and I think about it. It was fine. You really don't need to use CMD because you're going to take a significant hit to brightness if you do. A lot. From what I measured, JVC even came back and said it can actually be up to 50% brightness. I measured much less. I think it was 28 or maybe 32 or something like that. I'd have to check my notes. But if you use CMD, you are going to take a hit on brightness for sure.
That's because they're using black frame insertion.
So yeah, I would say probably, yeah, and it's noticeable. It is super noticeable. Like as soon as I turned it on, I can see it. Like I can visibly see it, and it was even worse if I recorded it. It's pretty strong. So just keep that in mind. Outside of that, they changed the menu. I don't like it personally. It's not awful, and I think I might just be super sensitive to it because I spend so much time in menus. I don't think it's going to bother most users because once you get into it and you set it up the way you need, you're probably going to always go to the same menu. But for someone like me that's bouncing around between a lot of the different areas, it was kind of cumbersome. They basically broke it down into, where is it at? Picture settings, HDMI settings, and installation settings. When you choose one of these, that becomes the default for that menu. So anytime you click menu, you're going to go into whatever you have selected. So if you have HDMI settings selected, you automatically go into HDMI settings. If you have picture menu selected, you go into the picture settings. There are some quirks with it. So like say you have this set as your main default menu, but then you hit lens control. It actually changes your default to lens control. And then you have to go back and change your default again. So it's just kind of quirky. They basically just separated everything and spread it out. That's really what they did. I'm personally not a huge fan of it, but I'll get used to it as I don't have a choice. So
part of that is what you get accustomed to. And if you're used to finding things in a certain place, it's hard to change. And if you've used any of the older JVC menus, you know that you kind of have to dig a little bit. You know, sometimes it's a click into this menu, then another click, and then another click even to find what you're looking for. So
the other thing when you're talking about installation modes too, that I was surprised by, there is a considerable difference here with installation in terms of throw distances and all that. So you want to make sure you're working with somebody like the screening room who actually will check the math for you, make sure your projector will work at the throw. It's different than the older models as far as what the range of zoom and throw distances you can use it. Say we lost Sammie. Oh, he's back.
Yeah, no, every time my dog comes in, I'm assuming he wants to like go out, and he just like walks in, looks around, and then goes back upstairs.
We should have a separate camera for the dog. What's the dog's name?
Ace.
Ace. Okay.
Yeah, he's a little Shiba Inu.
Cool. Just seeing, was there more that you wanted to share off of that? There was a couple of questions. We're mostly caught up. There was just a couple that had to do with.
No, that was really it. Unfortunately, I did not take ANSI. I understand the significance of ANSI measurements, but it's so room dependent, and my room's not awful, but it's not something where I think that it would be representative, like, oh, this would be, ideal for this ANSI measurement for this projector. Because also I can measure it and say you get, 400 to 1. You go to someone else's house, that 400 to 1 is now 175. So yeah. So I didn't do ANSI. I really focused in on just its overall performance, picture quality. The tone mapping is exactly the same as the 900, the 800. You're not getting anything different there. You have deep black. You have the new version of Frame Adapt.
It doesn't have the theater optimizer, though.
Theater optimizer's gone.
Yeah, that's gone. So it does still have the screen adjust, but it doesn't have theater optimizer.
Speaking of tone mapping, somebody has here, Nathan asks, well, people rightly praise JVC's frame-by-frame dynamic tone mapping. It sounds like one needs more peak output to make it work well versus the ability of Lumagen/MadVR to tone map well, even if one doesn't have as much peak output. Comment on that?
I guess I'm curious. Are you talking about like trying to target like 300 nits or something, or like what are you?
This is Nathan. Maybe he'll clarify.
I think I know what he means.
The tone mapping is good. It's in regards to projection, it's about as good as you're going to get for what's built in. Though I will say that I do think people will be very surprised when they start looking at, I know this is for like the 500 and stuff, but being honest, I do think people are going to be very surprised when they start to see the new Sonys and they're compared to one another, because they've gotten very close. I think the JVCs are still going to get it in terms of overall detail, but when it comes to being able to do things with like peak highlights, that might actually go into their favor. But they are very close. But I still think this is kind of the benchmark for what's built into a projector.
And if I can just kind of comment on that, at CEDIA, I saw Sony's new tone mapping that they were doing, and it was considerably better than what we've seen in the past. So we're looking at doing another famous screening room shootout here sometime in the near future with one of these new high brightness Epsons, one of the new Sonys, and these new JVCs, probably one of the lower end and one of the higher end. Won't be 8 projectors for sure. That almost killed us, especially Kris last time. But we're looking at comparing that because it looks like Sony is up their game in the tone mapping department for sure. Still other issues that you mentioned, but we'll see that when we do our comparison. Kris, said you had an idea? Let me see if Nathan said anything more here.
Because somebody, they were asking about like compared to video processors. I think the big difference that you see between video processors, whether it be MadVR or Lumagen, compared to like something like what JVC does. If you look at the way JVC does their tone mapping, they are frame adaptive, but you basically have like a limited amount of basically preset compression ranges that they use. So, they have like auto wide, auto normal. I don't know if this one has the same. And then they have like -2 to +2. So all the autos are doing is just kind of deciding which one of those models they want to use based on, whatever they're looking at, the frame or the metadata or whatever. but it still kind of locks them into a range where you can say like, hey, I just want it to be bright all the time, or hey, I want to have a little more dynamic range but a darker image. But they still have kind of a small latitude of compression ranges to pick from, and they always don't pick, the best one of them, depending. Auto wide tends to be, a little bit too on the high side and always trying to give you brightness over range. So you're more likely to have something that looks a little more compressed and with some clipping. But auto normal tends to kind of falter more towards the bottom of it, where you're getting, it's not going to look as bright and punchy, but you're actually going to have more resolve in it. What outboard video processors like Lumagen and MadVR do is they're better at kind of optimizing the images so that you get the best of both, where you can get, nice bright highlights without, as much crunchiness, I guess, or as much clipping as you might get from a JVC, or like the overall image always looking kind of bright, while also still getting, the resolve and everything like that. So it's like JVC kind of plays in a smaller sandbox. It works pretty well at what it is. And again, like, most of the time the differences really start to separate when you get into the really bright material or the really dark material, but kind of that like middle of the line, normal average stuff looks good most of the time anyway. But they're just a little bit better at balancing all the elements all the time without you having to be like, auto wide's too much for this one. Let me go to this one. Oh, I don't like that. I'm going to pick one of their modes, and stuff like that. Like the outboard video processors are more of just like a, once they're set up, you rarely ever have to touch them, and they do good across pretty much any range of content. Like, yes, you can make them do more or whatever, but the baseline is just so much better across everything without you having to fiddle with it.
Yeah, the JVC should honestly, like if I had ever had any type of influence, I would request go to like -8 and then to like +4. So that way you actually have like more stops, because there's some scenes that it still can't really do because it's not right. And then you're still relying on the metadata. So it has to fall into one of these buckets. So if they had more ranges, it would have more to choose from. But then you have issues of, if it doesn't have metadata, it's automatically choosing number one. And if the metadata is there, it could be wrong. So it might not be choosing it correctly anyways. So it has a lot going for it, but it could be better. Like there's stuff that they could do to make it better.
Yeah. So if we can just take a quick break here for, I call it station identification, just a little bit about the screening room. We still have some questions to get to, and then we're going to talk about the higher end models, the 800 and the 900, the comparison we do between the 9 and the 900, and then also the comparison we do between the 500 and the 900. I'm going to come back to that, but just for a second here, I'm going to pay some bills. This is us. I'm going to share this again. So the screening room is who we are. As mentioned at the top, our whole approach is to actually validate and test the products that we sell. And we don't sell anything that we can't validate in some way or that we can stand behind in terms of cutting through marketing BS, in terms of actual performance. As I mentioned at the top, we're famous for doing that 8 projector shootout a couple of years ago with Kris's and Sammie's help. We're going to have another projector shootout coming up. It's a big deal to us that we take the time to level the playing field, so all the projectors are performing at their best rather than just taking them out of the box and going, aren't they amazing? We actually put things through their paces. We're famous for doing our blind speaker shootouts where we invite people to bring speakers in, we hide them, level match them, and then we have a shuffler so we can move the speakers back and forth. We do blind speaker comparisons. So this is the kind of stuff that we do. We're very skeptical of marketing claims, and Sammie and Kris are wonderful allies because they are also, as you can tell from this. And then the one thing that just kind of want to harp on just a little bit, if you're enjoying this podcast, and again, we will be sharing this at full quality. All the video and audio is recording at full quality with Riverside. So when we publish it, everything will be at full quality. But hey, it's the sales that we make from events like this that help fund future events. So if you like the idea of projector shootouts and speaker shootouts and electronic comparisons, we did a shootout between Kaleidoscape versus streaming audio and disc audio versus streaming audio. That was a blind shootout, and we published that. All this stuff is up on our website. So this is the kind of stuff that we do, and we hope to earn your business. And we're hoping that if you like what you see and hear during this podcast, and also on our website, that you will consider, if you're looking at one of these things, to work with us. Steve, did you want to add anything to that? Steve is currently running the screen room day to day as I get finished on hopefully this film that I've been working on forever here.
No, you covered it perfectly. I mean, I think the key takeaway is if you're looking at an NZ500 or NZ700 or something else that we sell and you appreciate what we do here, please give us a shot.
So that's what we wanted to say. So you can check out our blog. All those shootouts that we're talking about are on there. We publish measurements. We share the test scores. We have a newsletter sign up on our website. If you sign up for the newsletter, we only send it out a couple of times a month. We don't spam people, and it tells you about our future events. The projector shootout we'll be doing here soon. We hope to have a new showroom here in a couple of months. We'll have a grand opening. And then we have home theater get-togethers. We have people over. We have a bartender. It's fun. And the promotions and specials. So all that stuff is there. So moving on, talk about so Steve and I, if we can just for a moment here, share our impressions. Steve, did you want to say, I kind of shared what I thought of when I saw the Sammie first power up the 500. Do you want to share what you thought?
Yeah. I mean, I was impressed with how good it looked for being an entry level machine. And I did something crazy. I asked Sammie, I said, hey, let's zoom this in, or out, I guess, and look at it on John's 144-inch screen, which is, it's ridiculous. It's too big of a screen. We'd never recommend that size screen for that projector. But it still looked pretty good. So that's a pretty impressive test in terms of sharpness and even the brightness, even though it's not enough, but for that size of the screen, it looked really impressive. And we tested some, what we would consider torture test content. What's the really dark scene? It's the superhero movie.
Black Panther.
Yeah, Black Panther. That's the scene from Black Panther. And, that's one of the scenes that really separates the really good projectors from the not as good projectors. Because if you look at that scene in the jungle, where you can see the color of the dirt, and it's not masked by a high or elevated black level. And the contrast is really good. The black levels are really good, and the color looks really good, even in those, how the black comes out of, or how the projector comes out of black. That really impressed me, and I was pretty excited to see, a projector at that price point look that good. Yeah,
and again, we really pushed it to the limit, and then when we switched to the 4200 at that point, which again is the 900 for anybody who doesn't know the different model numbers. Obviously, there was a considerable difference in brightness between the two, comparing the two. But of course, mine also has the benefit of a Panamorph lens on it as well, boosting the brightness. And plus, because it has so much additional brightness, we were able to back the iris off 4 stops. Sammie had calibrated this, 6 months ago, wasn't it? 3-4 months ago, whenever that came out.
Yeah, pretty much right when it came out. And you're also using the color filter as well.
So I had the color filter in place. And I'm hitting, I think we got 109 nits of brightness on my 144-inch scope screen with the iris down 4 notches.
And
with
you're
with the help
around
of the Panamorph.
39,000 to 1, if I recall correctly, for contrast.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So your contrast is hitting what the 500 can do max. So
yeah, so that was noticeable. So there are distinct improvements as you go up the line. The contrast was better, the brightness was better, the sharpness was better. But to Steve's point, it's not like it was this, like a total rout. It wasn't just like it just, you always see these kind of things, and this is the kind of stuff we fight against. Oh, this blew away that one, or it destroyed that one. They both looked like really good JVCs. The 900 just had those extra bumps in contrast, brightness, and sharpness, which were there. But it's not like, all of a sudden the other one looked terrible in comparison to it. But I just wanted to say too, those of us who follow Steve and I often on HD and some of the other forums, we're always going on, just like Kris and Sammie are, about often people are just trying to push brightness for these gigantic screens. And then when they're doing woven screens that are negative gain and talking 150 inches scope screen on some of these projectors, it's just not enough brightness. But, this thing kind of held its own up to a certain point. Just all those different factors need to be considered when you're looking at the size of the screen, what's the gain of the screen, which projector model matches, and that's all part of what Kris and Sammie and the rest of us at TSR do. So Sammie looked like Sammie did Doug. I was going to ask him to share his impressions when we were comparing the 4200 with the 500.
Oh yeah, no, I'm still here. I'm just, I think he just wants to see me keep getting up. There was definitely a difference. The difference in contrast, like makes contrast was roughly the same. Where it really was noticeable, was more in like any type of like fade in, or when we were watching Black Panther and you had that little bit of extra green from the 900, right?
Yeah.
Like it was things like that were noticeable. But in terms of overall performance, in terms of motion, clarity, and sharpness, they're actually not that far apart. Enough that someone that could be looking at a 700, if they were going to say, for instance, get a 700 and use the filter, you might want to actually consider getting a 500, because that's going to drop your brightness down to roughly what the 500 is anyways. And you're still going to get great gamut coverage. You get a little bit more gamut coverage, obviously, with the 700 and a filter, but look at the savings that you would get. That's why this is interesting. Not saying that there's not other options out there, because there's plenty of options that are going to fit someone's use case better, but like value to performance, price to performance is really good. And again, it was super sharp. The contrast was good. The color was good. Came out of black great. The uniformity on this one was great. I mean, obviously, if I could pick either, I would choose the 900. But if the 900 is not in someone's wheelhouse, this is a good option, unless you need more light. If you need more light, then again, there's other options for that. So
yeah,
I think it does. I think it does well.
Yeah, no, it was, again, like I said, it wasn't one of those things where it destroyed the 500. Things that I kind of noticed that with that higher quality lens that's on the 4100 and 4200 and 900 is there seems to be more depth in dark scenes. And part of that is I have a better contrast, like you said, Sammie. You measured like almost 40,000 to 1 with mine, but there's like that shot from Alien that we use in our shootouts a lot. There's more sense of dimensionality and depth there. But again, not night and day difference, but it was there to be seen. And we'll do more when we do our next projector shootout, because this was more of a casual viewing. It's not like we took all the time to level match the brightness and everything else like we would normally do. And when we push that 500 to fill up the entire width of the 11-foot wide screen, that, of course, you had to open the iris and everything all the way up. And contrast started taking a hit, noticed compared to when it was certainly smaller. That to me was quite noticeable, just because we were able to dial the iris down when the image was smaller.
Yeah, there were some things that resolved much better with the 900. So, for instance, when we were watching the intro, mainly just listening to the Danny Elfman theme.
The Benny Beetlejuice thing.
Yeah, like when it's going through the town and you have some of those little models at the very end, like you were able to actually see them a lot better. You're able to make them out more. Not that they're obscured by any means. It's just that you had that much more clarity on the 900. But at the same time, if you had something else with lower contrast ratio, it would look super milky, where this actually held like a nice shadow detail, looked good. You can make out what you're looking at. Nothing was super obscured. Same thing with Black Panther. So it does really well. It actually does do very, very well.
Yeah, and it wasn't the type of level playing field comparison that we normally do, and we plan to do one of those as soon as it's feasible. We want to get one of the newer Epsons because there's interest about those, and we get some insane. Was it 5,000 lumen? The Epson 8,000 is claiming. We want to get one of those in here and compare it against one of the newer Sonys with their improved tone mapping, with these new JVCs and see them side by side with the more control. Because it wasn't really fair with mine because I had the benefit of the Panamorph and so on and so forth.
This was very like impromptu, like, hey, you guys want to see this?
Yeah.
That's kind of how it happened. So
and to be to be fair, we're comparing a entry level projector to a reference high end projector through a lens, like the lens in front of John's 4200 cost almost as much as the projector itself, the entry level projector. So
just to put that all in the context, that please don't take this as a critical comparison. There was a question here. I knew this was going to come because somebody asked this in Facebook before we went live here. The new triple laser projectors like the Valerian can go up to 100% Rec 2020. Reviews say they're sharp. Also, dynamic contrast is closer to JVC without artifacts, at least according to the claims. How would that compare to the 500? Many people are waiting for that. I don't know if we can really answer that, but if Sammie and Kris want to jump in on that, I'm sure people would be interested to hear.
So I have not seen a Valerian yet. It's interesting. The two things that are most interesting to me about it are the laser dimming. That's one, and they were doing something else. What was it called? I can't remember offhand. So I'm sorry, can't remember offhand. But they're doing like two things that are like interesting. For me as an individual, like just as a consumer, it wouldn't work for me because of the fixed lens. Now I know they have one that I believe are two that are coming with a focal lens, but even then, it's putting its throw like in my seat. So that's not really of interest to me personally. But I think what people kind of need to keep in mind, and again, I haven't seen it, so I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad because I don't know. Something doing 15,000 to 1 is great, especially with laser dimming on a DLP. That's awesome. But again, like I'm more curious, like how does it come out of black? As soon as it hits that small percentage above black, does it fall apart? Like what happens? So until I can test one and measure one, I could not really answer that. And then in regards to things like Rec 2020, there's a lot of things to say the Rec 2020. And this is not anything against Valerian, because I test a bunch of USTs and a bunch of lifestyle projectors that are like triple laser and they'll do 2020. That's great. But when you're looking at 2020, most of the content for 2020 is if you're actually seeing it. So take Inside Out. Take La La Land, take Aquaman, take Into the Spider-Verse, like any of these movies. And there's some that this doesn't apply to, but generally this is very, very dark color, very, very dark saturated color. So one thing I'm curious about is like, okay, it does 2020, but does it desaturate at low luminance? Like, does anyone know? Because if it desaturates at low luminance, so say for instance, you need 100% saturated, 10% stimulus red. But as soon as it gets that, it desaturates to almost P3. That's not 2020. So like I get it. I am curious about it. I'm not sure if I'm going to get my hands on one. I'm not running out to buy one, but I am curious because if their laser dimming is good, and say for instance they start to license it to others, that's huge. All DLPs are pretty much sharp. I outside of like it's the tone mapping. Supposedly they have very good tone mapping. I'm interested in seeing that. And even though I would like to see it, I don't think that I would be the type of person to be the best person to test that. Like there's other people that will do waveforms and histograms and everything else to give you like really good data on tone mapping. So I'd like to see people like that get a hold of it. So, I know. Because if, again, say it's great and they start to license it, that's huge. As much as I like things like video processors, do I really want to necessarily need to have one? No, if I can get away without having one, I would. So I think the Valerian is interesting. I think it's, I think people are very passionate about it, which is good to see for the AV community, but I can't honestly answer that question to how it will compare. So,
yeah. Well,
yeah,
we'll
I think we're going to have to wait until more people get their hands on it. Start taking measurements. There's always a ton of hype around brand new products, especially when they're brand new products that are at a significantly lower price point than what people expect to have a certain level of quality. And so the hype machine goes into high gear. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see. I mean, it may be awesome, but we're just going to have to wait and see when those products start getting into everybody's hands that has the right experience and the equipment to test them, to see what they're really doing and what they really look like.
Yeah, there's the right equipment to test them, and then making sure it's a legit level playing field comparison as well. Speaking of that, I was just going to go through the last couple of slides here and then just finish up with any questions. We're almost at an hour and a half here. We didn't want to go too late. I don't want to keep Sammie and Kris up too late. So let's get any of your last questions kind of on the side. In the meantime, and I don't know how well this is going to translate to the stream here, but again, when we publish the high resolution version to YouTube and probably Facebook as well, you'll be able to see this stuff. This was a slide here, and again, I don't know how well you can see this, and that's one of the reasons why we don't usually do these type of things. This is when we compared, again, thanks to Sammie coming out, we compared my brand new RS4200/NZ900 sample to my previous RS4100/NZ9 sample. And again, I don't know how well you can see this. The 4200 was distinctly sharper. Not only was it distinctly sharper, it had one of the things that I always notice is more of a sense of three-dimensionality. There was more depth to the image. That's one image of that. This is a little bit closer. And this was kind of, with Sammie's help, just kind of dialing in and dialing back some of those over-sharpening features. So we think this is a pretty fair representation of the difference in clarity in the but then again, Sammie was also saying that I probably have the best 4200 sample he's seen. So I'm very pleased about that. It's sitting in our reference showroom, which also happens to be in my house. So if anyone wants to come see it, they're welcome too. But anyway, that was the kind of, we mentioned that we would talk about this. Sammie and Steve, if you want to throw out any other thoughts about what you saw comparing those, and also the 500 versus the 900. Again, I just wanted to make sure that we covered that before we finish up with questions here.
I don't really have anything. I would say this is pretty representative of what we saw. The 900, even though like it initially had a lot of over processing on,
Yeah.
once we
This was after we turned it down.
Yeah, it was still like super sharp. And it's a noticeable difference.
Yeah. And like I said, the depth, there was that one shot you had, that mixed contrast kind of thing, when, that's one of the things that DLPs do well, is in a mixed contrast sequence, and whether it's mixed contrast, ANSI, whatever you want to call it, a greater sense of depth. So Steve, did you want to take a look through the questions here, see what I missed?
Yeah, a couple things. Let's see. Mike asked if my scroll wheel would work. Mike asked, would the NZ700 end up being close to the NZ800 with the filter, purely from a brightness and noise perspective, considering the NZ700 loses less with the filter and can run at the higher laser level with the same noise? Sammie?
I'm sorry,
Kris?
I was reading something. I'm sorry.
That's okay. He's just asking about would the NZ700 be close to an NZ800 with the filter, purely from a brightness and noise standpoint, considering the NZ700 loses less with the filter and can run at the higher laser level with the same noise?
I think it's going to be dependent on screen size and throw, but it could. I mean, ideally, it would, because you have. Well, no, it's going to depend on your screen size and throw. Then turn on the filter, lose 33%. Depends on what it ends up at when it's corrected and its lumens. They could be comparable, but ideally the 800 would have just overall more headroom, but not by much.
Yeah,
that's one of the things.
But you're also ignoring some of the other things, like no E shift, no 3D, and so it really is going to come down to what do you really need in the projector. Just in terms of pure image quality, they'd probably be pretty close, I would imagine.
One of the things that really impressed me, Sammie, when you did my calibration was being able to knock that iris down a few steps, how much that improved overall contrast. And I'm so used to that now compared to what I had before. That was kind of a big deal to me. And I've become addicted to the image on this new one. I'm really happy with what you did with it and what Kris has done with mine in the past too. What else we got there?
Let's see. Another question was, trying to scroll through. I can't mark these or anything. Let's see. Oh yeah. If brightness matched between an NZ800 or NZ900 with itself compared to the aperture closed, is a difference noticeable in contrast in content? I know the measurement would show higher numbers, but is it worth closing the aperture, and how much should you close?
I generally never, it's rare that I will ever close the aperture more than 3. Sometimes I will. Sometimes I'll go to 4 or 5, depending on what the target is going to be. Like if we're really shooting for 100 nits, I look at how much of a gain I'm actually getting, because sometimes your better choice is to run at a lower laser power and just leave the aperture more open. So that is one of the things with the 500. The gains that you get in contrast by closing on the aperture is pretty small. Like it's because you're starting at 22,000 and then you're going up to 40,000. And that's with including increasing the throw. So with any setup, I would say if you can net a good, I don't know, 6,000 contrast without going like too crazy, I usually think it's worth it. But if you have to drop down to like -7 to get to like 40,000, that's not worth it. Like just run at a lower laser and maybe close it like a click or two.
Yeah. I was just going to say, you're starting with a pretty high contrast projector to begin with, and most people would probably be better off with the light than sacrificing the light for a little bit more contrast.
Yeah, like if the gains are significant enough to see like, okay, I'm going to get with this one click, I'm getting 1,200. It's like, all right, let me click it down one more time. Okay, now I'm I took it from my 22,000 to 26,000. I might do one more click. Oh, I'm at 31,000. Sure, I'll take that. But if it's negligible, like say I can only get from like 22 to I don't know 27, I'm probably keeping the aperture open, honestly. So
yeah, it just seemed like you hit a really nice. We didn't have to push mine all the way in the highest laser setting. The noise is tolerable. I always wish these things were dead quiet. The contrast gain and everything for me was just like a nice conglomeration of nice convergence of factors. I'm looking back through here. Are they shipping a decent amount in the first wave? Are they going to be trickling in? We understand they're going to be shipping in decent quantities middle of December. And again, if you're interested in one of these, we're going to raise our hand and say, please give us a shout. We talked about the 2020 thing and how things come out of black, how important that is, which we've seen that is so important in our shootouts when we put lower APL content up, what a difference that can make between projectors. Light recycling in the 500 will be brighter at a 10% window than 100% full screen brightness. There's a couple of questions about light recycling here.
It's the same.
Kris could probably speak more on light recycling.
It's the same as the other models.
Same as the other models?
At least all indications are it's the same.
I think. Well, let me. Oh, sorry. I thought I was done, but I'm just. It's just mentioned EBL.
I think we've covered almost everything. There was one person kind of trying to decide between an NZ700 and NZ500. That really depends. That's going to come down to your screen size and gain. And does the 500 get there? If it does, you're probably okay with the NZ500. If you want a little brighter, you want the NZ700. Or if you want the color filter, then you'd have to go with the NZ700.
And again, according to JVC, the 700 should have better contrast, but we'll see. We're going to be getting, I don't know, Ryan, if you are here in Colorado, but we will be getting 2200/700, and we will have one, and Sammie will be putting his eyes on it, and probably Kris at some point here soon, and we'll be doing another shootout. I'm not sure exactly when that's going to be because we're trying to move into a new location. So do we do it at our old location or the new one? So any quick thoughts
One more last
on
question,
the 500? John? Yeah, this is the last one. So any quick questions on the 500 versus the Epson laser? So I assume we're talking about the Epson 12,000.
Yeah, I would imagine similar price point would be an LS 12,000.
Yeah, that's if you need more light. Like if this wasn't enough for someone, and you needed more light, what I would do is I would probably look at an LS 12,000. And then after that, if you want it, it depends on what you value more. If you really, really like contrast or like black floor, I would probably start looking at like the 700. Once you start getting into the NZ 800 and 900 tiers, that's where it's going to get a little bit more difficult for some people, because like, okay, if you want 3D, you really only have one choice. If you are a heavy gamer, you kind of now only have one choice. Well, you don't have one choice, but that choice should have already kind of been made by the latency measurements of the 6100 and 8100.
And speaking of that, Sammie did measure high lag, but supposedly that will be addressed in the firmware update for new JVC.
Yes. Yeah. So the 500 should be around 34 milliseconds for 60 hertz in 1080p and 4K. I measured 34 milliseconds for 1080p, and I measured 51 for 4K 60. In an ideal world, there really should be no difference. But the reason I generally measure specifically the resolution and frame rate. So a lot of times in reviews or when people measure something, they will measure it based off of 1080p because they might not have the equipment to measure something at 4K 120 or 8K 60 or whatever. And then they kind of extrapolate it and say, oh, this is also going to be 4K 60. That's not really how it works, especially with projection that does any type of E-shift or pixel shifting. So I always measure specifically the resolution and frame rate. And the 500, if you send it 4K 60 and actually measure 4K 60, it's 51 milliseconds. JVC found a bug with it, so they are going to fix it.
Yeah, then it will be fixed. Well, I think that's the last question we have. Sammie and Kris, did you guys have any last comments you wanted to share about any of the stuff that we covered before I kind of wrap it up here? Sammie, Kris, either one of you guys?
Nope.
No, I think everything was pretty much covered.
Okay, so just to wrap it up, once again, if you're interested in any of these, we really would appreciate if you'd reach out to us. Obviously, all of you signed up here today have our contact information, and it's right there up on the screen. And if you like this kind of event, and if you're excited about a screening room projector shootout or a screening room speaker shootout, or where we did the streaming versus physical media type things, these things aren't cheap to put on. And we hope to, and we try to keep them fair and honest by having people like Sammie and Kris involved. We've also had people from Trinov and Seton Sound and Sean Olive, Dr. Sean Olive from Harmon X Research, making sure to keep us honest. If those kind of things are valuable to you, one of the things we've considered doing is starting to charge for these type of events. But if we can make it happen in terms of earning your business, maybe we don't need to do that. So that's the last peel. That's the last part of the commercial. Steve, did you have anything you wanted to say before I go ahead and end the session?
Nope. Just want to thank everybody for coming. If I could go through and hit the like button on everybody's comment, I would. But thank you all for being here.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kris and Sammie, particularly, and everybody who asked questions. Thank you for keeping this kind of quite in depth and interesting. And we'll see you at the next one. We got some other ones planned coming up here before too long. So thank you again for joining us. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Thanks, everybody.